Good morning, and I want to thank everybody for coming out. This is a really important topic, so we wanted to make sure that we could communicate with the general public on where we go from here. And what I'm talking about is the eviction moratorium. So that is going to end very soon. And we know that the next 12 months will be the hardest time for many of our families that are just now getting back to work. And so we're very fortunate in our community that we have amazing people that can come together, sit at a table, and figure out the best course of action. So what you'll see today is we have everyone from legal aid, our assistant county manager, to our judges who are front lines on these, all came together to come up with a program that is really going to have all of the resources available for folks when the time that they'll need it most. So I know that you all would like to hear from them on exactly how we're going to roll that out, but with our folks out there, because we don't want anybody to be in a situation where they could become homeless if we could help them stay in their homes. And that is our first priority, and it is going to be a hard and lots of work lift, but we want to know that we're here and we have plenty of resources. So with that, I will introduce our Assistant County Manager, Kevin Schiller, who's worked very hard on this issue because it impacts us every single day. So, Kevin?
Morning, everybody. First, I want to highlight a couple key pieces to this. As the chairwoman highlighted, we have the eviction moratorium ending, and we have an exciting collaboration as we try to face the unmet need of those that are going to be facing rental assistance needs and evictions. With that, there's two key pieces. I want to make sure you're seeing individuals before you that are going to speak before you today, but I want to recognize Supreme Court Chief Justice Hardesty, the Justice Court, Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and Henderson. The cities of Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and Henderson on their collaborative funding to support our processes. Legal Aid Center of Northern Nevada, Shannon Chambers, the Nevada Labor Commissioner and President of Home Means Nevada, who is administering the eviction mediation program. In addition to that, partners that aren't here, State of Nevada, our legislative body, in supporting our processes as we look at policies and our mediation, the governor's office, and all funding to support this. With that said, and with that list, I would want to make sure that everybody is aware of the fact that we are rolling out a program with that collaboration to support eviction prioritization. And with that moratorium ending, and as we move forward, this collaboration has not existed in the history of the state. So what this will allow for is a connection point between mediators, the CHAP Rental Assistance Program, and Clark County in conjunction with the courts in terms of notifications and those prioritizations. So the anticipation with the extension of the moratorium, when that came out, we began working immediately on this process to support the wave that we expect as we move through this. With that, there's some questions around CHAP rental assistance and how that process works within this. Within the confines of this program, it is still going to be rental assistance in that prioritization. We have spent since January, with the award of the second round of the funding and the Treasury guidance, putting in place both IT improvements tied to the Treasury guidance, which is very important in terms of how we expend those dollars, and added up to almost another 100 individuals to a total of almost 300 temporary staff to support this process. I want to emphasize that is continuous and ongoing. We continue to train and do that in the current process. We have also added a landlord portal. One of the key issues when we reviewed our initial rental assistance program was the fact that landlords have to put in their vendor information and their W-9s. Confidentiality is a key issue in that, and so what we did is we actually did IT upgrades to support that portal so they can do that independent of those applicants, which tends to be a barrier to expediting payment in the process. This pandemic, as much as we're seeing much around the fact that we are starting to wind down, as I sit before you without a mask today, the other piece is we are winding up in the context of human services and what we expect to see with the lift of the moratorium and what we expect to see over the next year to 18 months. So this will not be a short-term process, but a long-term process. And with that, as many of you are aware, the Rescue Act funds are forthcoming. With those Rescue Acts, that is also an active piece of this discussion to support this, with this program lasting not only through the pandemic, but being a process that we can do it continuously with our justice courts as we deliver social service. The last piece I wanted to highlight is that as we move forward and we look at numbers, everybody out there is asking timeframes, processing, and how we manage that. In the current structure, there's approximately 9,000 applicants that are sitting in the queue. If you go back historically and look at that, we were up to 20,000 historically. And in the funding sources, we have administered $92 million in the first round. We're going to be administering another $160 million in the second round, and we will be going before our board for a third round to support this process. So the last piece I'll do before I introduce the next speaker is to just emphasize documentation for the applicants is one of the key issues in the application process. And for us to adequately administer, we have to make sure people can get into the portal, but also that they complete the documentation. And we will have nonprofits that will go live next week, and their entire role will be to support applicants in the process. With that, I'd like to introduce Jim Perchtold with Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada.
Good. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Berchtold. I'm a directing attorney with the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. Here with me today is Barbara Buckley, who is our executive director. First, I want to say what an honor it has been for Legal Aid Center to be part of this really historic collaboration. And I want to thank everyone who is not only here today, but who participated in the weekly work groups that we had trying to put this plan together. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Legal Aid Center, its attorneys, its staff have really worked hard to protect the rights, the legal rights of tenants who are facing eviction and to try to avoid eviction whenever possible. So to see a thoughtful plan come together that links tenants with rental assistance and links them with mediation and links them with rehousing if necessary is very, very encouraging as we see the moratorium lift July 1. Now, in the next couple of months, Legal Aid Center, as part of this plan, will be focusing on outreach to tenants. We have been doing our best over the last year to get the message to tenants about what they need to do to protect themselves from eviction. So we have broken it down into 4 really easy steps, and because I can't say them enough, I'm going to say them one more time. So step number 1, a tenant needs to, if they are eligible, sign a CDC declaration and give it to their landlord to get the protection of that CDC moratorium that will last until July 1. Step 2, a tenant needs to apply for rental assistance through the CHAP program. Step 3, if a tenant gets an eviction notice, the tenant absolutely must file an answer with the Justice Court. And that is now easier than ever to do. Tenants can actually do that from their own home online without ever going to the courthouse. Step 4, when the tenant files that answer with the court, the tenant needs to elect mediation so that they have the opportunity to go into that mediation program and sit down with their landlord and potentially work out a resolution. So those are the 4 steps. I will add a 5th step. If at any point during this process the tenant has a question or runs into an issue, they should call Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada because we're there to help them. So you will be hearing more about this outreach effort over the next couple of weeks. We are going to try to start pushing this out more than we have been, and we will be asking for all of your assistance, the assistance of the media, the assistance of other community providers, to get that information out to tenants so that they know what they need to do to protect themselves and be part of this plan to hopefully avoid as many evictions as possible. So again, just let me say thank you to everyone who has participated in this. Thank you for all of you for being here today. And now I will turn it over to Shannon Chambers, who is the Nevada Labor Commissioner and the president of Home Means Nevada, which is the entity in charge of the eviction mediation program.
So good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the previous speakers for introducing all of this and kind of introducing Home Means Nevada, who is the administrator of the rental eviction mediation program. As Mr. Berchwold said, I am the Nevada Labor Commissioner. I'm also the president of Home Means Nevada, which on another topic also administers the foreclosure mediation program, so we were a logical choice to implement the rental eviction mediation program. So we implemented this program last October before the new moratorium came into effect this year. We processed over 1,000 cases through that program, working with the courts, working with legal aid, working with landlords and tenants. And we have worked very collaboratively with all the people in this room today. And what I want to express to you today is what a value the mediation process is. Now, it doesn't always result in a positive result, and I want to make that clear on the record here, but it provides a neutral platform for the parties to come together to explore all the options that are available to them. That could be rental assistance, it could be unemployment, it could be other types of agreements where the landlord agrees to reduce the rent or other options that are available. What we have heard through the program and through tenants and landlords is that it really provides, again, that impartial person to listen to both parties. Obviously, eviction is a very sensitive and can be a very emotionally charged issue. So the mediator can kind of separate the emotion from the facts and work with the parties to come to an agreement. So Home Means Nevada is very committed to this effort. We are sort of the state of Nevada piece to this. I am an appointee of the governor of Nevada, Governor Sisolak, who feels very strongly about this program. I also work very closely with the Nevada legislature, who also feels very strongly about this program. So we have brought on over 100 mediators to handle what we think is going to come starting July 1st. But again, want to emphasize here today that mediation is an extremely valuable process, and we look forward to working with the courts and working with legal aid and all the parties involved here. And I can't tell you how honored I am to be working with the Clark County court system and the judges here today. And with that, I will introduce the Honorable Judge Melissa Saragosa from the Las Vegas Justice Court. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shannon. And before I get started, I actually want a trio of us here today. While I'm the Chief Judge of the Las Vegas Justice Court, we also have with us today the Chief Judge of the North Las Vegas Justice Court, Judge Natalie Terrell, and the Chief Judge of the Henderson Justice Court, Judge Sam Bateman. So I'm going to turn it over to them first and then have a few closing words.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. We at the North Las Vegas Justice Court are committed to partner with Clark County, the state of Nevada, and our federal representatives to make sure that preventable evictions are just that, prevented. We want to make sure that tenants receive aid that they're eligible for and that landlords receive the rental monies for providing that housing during this difficult pandemic. Specifically in North Las Vegas, I just want our residents to know that Nevada Partners has been contracted by Clark County to provide assistance and to help them make sure they are document ready when they make application for that rental assistance. So I just want to encourage our residents in North Las Vegas to please take advantage of the resources that are available, and please never not answer anything from the court. Make sure that you pay attention to any notices you get, because otherwise there's a dilemma. So please take every action that you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo for Henderson Justice Court that we'll be operating very similarly with North Las Vegas. But I wanted mostly to take the opportunity to thank the leadership of some of our community leaders, in particular Chairwoman Kirkpatrick. She's been on this issue from day one. We've had lots of meetings with her to try to make sure that we got on top of this issue. So she's really been a leader on the housing situation, the evictions going forward. And obviously, Barbara Buckley from Legal Aid, who's been working tirelessly the whole time to make sure that the most vulnerable people in the community are protected as well. We're all committed to impartial justice going forward between obviously renters and landlords, but we certainly recognize the precarious position that the pandemic has put, in particular, low-income tenants in. So we are certainly aware of that. We're going to continue working even after this process with the leaders with the county, with Ms. Buckley and her group, social services. I think you'll see actually out of this a long-term commitment to getting that information out there and having a more fair system going forward. So thank you very much.
I kind of wanted to touch upon first one of the things that Judge Bateman said, and it's interesting, this pandemic, while it's changed many of our normal procedures, we've identified some areas that we can carry, not just for this surge of evictions that may come our way, but carry into the future for the long term. And that's one of the partnerships between the courts and Clark County Social Services that has really blossomed through this process and this collaboration. And I hope that that's going to really be a partnership that lasts for decades to come. I want to answer a few questions that I think are probably pending about the process and what people are supposed to do with the courts. The first thing I want to highlight is if you are either a landlord or a tenant, the court has forms that are supplied in a partnership with the Civil Law Self-Help Center in the Regional Justice Center. And this all of the forms that you need, whether it's a form for a tenant to file an answer, or to a landlord who needs to file a motion to have their case on, or a complaint for an eviction. All of those forms are available at civillawselfhelpcenter.org. That's a great resource for any questions that you have and any forms that you need. And Mr. Berchtold mentioned one of the things that we have been able to do during this pandemic is we've created forms that are similar to TurboTax. So for a tenant answer, for example, a tenant can go through a series of questions online, and those answers to those questions will automatically populate the proper form that is needed for the court that they're filing with, and then it can be electronically filed right into our system. That is a benefit that prevents any tenant from having to take time off of work or take time to come down to the courthouse to fill out paperwork. But if you need assistance with that, one of the things that we've identified recently is some space in the Regional Justice Center. It just happens to coincide with the fact that municipal court just commissioned their new courthouse. So they vacated a great deal of space in the Regional Justice Center, which is giving us the flexibility to handle this surge in evictions. We've identified space where there will be volunteers and assistants that will be able to help anybody file the paperwork that they need and file it electronically in a quick, easy fashion. It will limit your time in the court building if you need to come down there, if you have questions, but you also can do that from home. Now, with respect to volume, I will say that when the eviction moratorium was put in place December 15th of 2020, the Las Vegas Justice Court had approximately 4,000 cases that were pending, that were stayed and halted at any various point in the process. What we've done in this partnership that we've created is identify those 4,000 cases for Clark County Social Services so that they could start working with those landlords and those tenants to resolve any potential eviction dispute. I'm proud to say there's a good deal of those that have now been resolved. Additionally, we've identified cases that were pending where the tenant was already able to find other means to pay rent. Perhaps they worked out a negotiation of payment plan with a landlord. We found other tenants that were already able to find new housing and have already relocated. So that's a good news for the court, that we're not going to have an overload of cases that we would be unable to handle in a timely fashion. But we are expecting a surge. And I'm sure that there are landlords out there that, one, still need to move forward on a case. If you need to know how to do that, at least for the Las Vegas Justice Court, we have forms online through civillawselfhelpcenter.org for the landlord to request the reissuance of an eviction order that was previously issued but never executed on, and there are procedures that need to be followed. If you're a landlord who had a hearing scheduled and that hearing was vacated, there are forms online, a motion to have the matter placed back on calendar, and you can find those at the same website. Again, we'll put those on as quickly as we can. If your case is one in which either the landlord or the tenant seeks mediation, as Ms. Chambers mentioned just a few moments ago, that Supreme Court mediation program still exists. It is a period of time of 30 days from the time that the complaint is filed, so that both parties would be referred by the court to the mediation program, where they can assist the tenant in getting the rental assistance if they're eligible, assist the landlord in making the proper paperwork to get to be the third-party beneficiary of that, and take care of that defaulted rent. Additional resources that the Las Vegas Justice Court has is we've identified, we have hearing masters that are being added to our eviction calendar. With the recent municipal court moving out, we've identified new courtroom space so that we will be able to conduct court in a more spread out fashion, if you will, so that we're not bunching together people in a single hearing, which is been traditionally the way our court has handled matters. We're going to be able to have in a single courtroom where we can spread those cases out throughout the day. Overall, I would ask patience. We're not sure what we're going to see. We're not sure whether this new surge is going to put a backlog on our ability to hold the number of hearings that we can hold each week. Traditionally, our hearings have been set in about 7 to 10 business days, and that may be extended only because the court's capacity to handle them. We will do everything we can, and the Las Vegas Justice Court, as well as Henderson and North Las Vegas, are committed to moving our cases along as we can, getting them heard as quickly as we can with the capacity that we have. And I would just ask for your patience. Please understand that the court and all of these agencies are working very, very hard to accommodate the situation that we've come in and the moratorium being lifted. And with that, I think we're all open to answer any questions. Please, go ahead.
Yes, we at Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, we actually have a large portion of our staff who are bilingual, and so we make every effort to do our outreach in as many languages as we can accommodate. So yes.
Back here.
To repeat the question, you were asking about those that had applied previously with CHAP. So to differentiate that, the initial CARES first round funding, there was applications for CHAP and people put in applications, and remember there were two sides to that. There was a landlord application side and a client application side. All clients that were in that queue at the point that that money was exhausted with the round two were notified of what those requirements were specific to that. So in that round, they had to put in the new documentation to meet the new Treasury guidance for that funding. And then I think the second part, which ties to your question, is those that have put in applications that may have done that post-January. So let's assume they put it in the second round, I think is what you're getting at. Those applications are in a queue and a first come, first served basis. So when I spoke to ramping up both the staffing side of that with our IT changes, what will happen is that is going to get faster and faster as we anticipate, and that was the plan towards we ramp towards the end of the moratorium. So applicants that are sitting in that queue, if they have uploaded their document, I think some of the questions that come up is when are they going to hear from somebody? That's when it gets to the processor. So I think what I want to emphasize to the public is if you have an application in, you know the documentation requirements and you've completed those, it's there. It doesn't mean it's sitting and never going to be touched. It's there. Go ahead. It really, simply put, it's a capacity issue in relationship to the number of applicants in relationship to those that can process. So to give some context to that, I think I said earlier we're up to about 300 temporary staff. But two pieces that happened, we went live with the new portal with the new Treasury guidance on March 20th approximately. And following that process, then we have to train staff in that context and new employees because we're hiring up to support that. So it's really just a demand issue. But I would also say the key area where we see the barriers outside of that is the documents and the uploading of those documents. So we cannot process an incomplete application based on the required federal guidance. So it's kind of a combination of those three things.
And I just want to add one thing, because our office gets tons of calls for people in it. So you can always go back to the portal and check to make sure that all of your documents have been uploaded. And if you run into a problem, then that's where you can call my office and we'll help you get through that process. So what we find is after about 10 days, we have to, if we've tried to get a hold of you, if we've tried to get your documents and you do not communicate, which is what I asked all of you earlier, it's so important that you communicate one way or another so that we can move on, because there will be thousands of people that we have to help. But if we're stuck on one trying to get that information, please go back and check the portal. It is no different. People go and check the portal when it's income tax time to see what day they're going to get it. When was I supposed to get my stimulus? This is just as important to go back to verify that you have all of your information in the system, and we'll tell you what the next steps are and when we're contacting you. So.
It's really an unpredictable number, to be honest. I will say that there was a period of time, if you can recall, back in the fall between about October 15th and December 15th, that there was no moratorium in place in terms of the processing of the case. The CDC order that has been in place since September 4th of 2020 definitely is a moratorium in terms of the execution of any eviction order, but it didn't halt our court process. So we did have a number of cases that were processed even during that time. And while I don't have a specific number for you today, I can say there were probably about 1,500 or so, maybe a little bit higher than that we processed in that window. Now, none of those were executed upon if they were protected under the CDC's order and they had invoked their protection. But those are some of the ones that are still pending, because those that were stayed execution until January 1 of 2021 were then extended by the governor's directive and now are extended through May 31. So if there was an eviction order already granted, the potential for that eviction order to be reissued and executed upon June 1st exists for those particular cases.
Regarding chat, so on the website, I know there are folks out there who are certain that they've done documentation correctly, but their wait times are actually way too long. What is the current range of wait times right now when somebody should believe that it's normal that they'll be waiting, X amount of time, and at what point do they say, well, maybe there's an issue or there's an issue internally?
Mr. Birch, the director, is here. I don't know if he wants to reference that because that changes. We analyze that almost every day in terms of what our wait times look like, but I'll defer to him just on the time frame as we're currently seeing it.
Tim Birch, Human Services Administrator. So I guess the key is we're going to keep emphasizing, go back to the portal, because what we've done since the initial CHAP application is update the level of statuses that tell you where your application is moving along. Previous applicants would have seen basically a submitted and an approved, and there was a time in between there that could feel very long if you don't know statuses. We now have updated that so you can see exactly where we're moving along in that process. Also, all communication about your status and questions we have for you are going back to that portal, to your email. So it's really important that folks check that. That will be how they know where they are in that process. To restate the question, as the county has ramped on additional contract staff, and also dedicated staff to the process that we're here talking about today, we have seen the ability for us to address those quicker. Wait times toward the end of December last year, as we began to exhaust those initial CARE Act funds, had stretched into months. We are back into the weeks on that process, but once again, as the Chairwoman clarified, the time we spend trying to farm out or continue to work to get documents on a single case delays us from working on other cases. So that's a place where we just ask for all of the community's help, and while we're bringing on nonprofits to help get those individuals document ready so we can move through these faster. It's an unpredictable number, but our goal is to get to that time range that we've discussed previously.
I know there was another question back here, but I wanted to correct myself on something that I realized, or clarify, I should say. The CDC order and the CDC moratorium is still in effect until June 30th. The governor's moratorium, which was slightly different, is in effect until May 31st. So I wanted to make that clear. I either misspoke or just wasn't very clear a moment ago. If there was an eviction order previously issued that was stayed because of the governor's directive, it stayed until May 31st. If that eviction order was granted and stayed because of the CDC order, that is stayed until June 30. And I apologize for that confusion. And there's a question back here.
We've all been asking the same question.
So the question is, again, how does that application process work? So when an individual logs in and creates their application in the portal, it is critical that they upload the information, because if their application sits for 30 days with no movement, meaning they don't complete the application or upload their document, that application is timed out. So it's critical that folks check the portal. Once that application is accepted into the system and assigned to a worker, tenants will now see their status moving along. I'm not going to be able to give you a time frame because, again, it's individual. If we have to go back and forth with a client over the course of several weeks to get their application adjudicated, that's going to fall outside that time frame, and I would hate for it to come off as a promise. What I will say is this: we have increased the efficiency of the system. We now no longer have to go back and forth with landlords for faxing and bringing in paper documentation in. They have an electronic portal that they can now upload their information and validate that their tenant, this is the amount owed, and they can do that literally from the portal on their phone. That's going to increase efficiency. We don't know to what degree because we've just rolled that out to them yesterday, but we expect, in anticipation of today, we expect that process will greatly increase the efficiency of that. Our goal is, if clients have all their documentation fully loaded and we can get the landlord in that portal as well, then we can move these cases with much more efficiency than the manual processes we saw before. The checks do go to the landlord and that's why we have them validate the full amount of rent owed to the date that we processed that application, so that tenant is paid in full. So the checks go to the landlord. If for some reason the landlord is unwilling to participate in this program, we are able to issue assistance to the client. But the primary driver is always to the utility company, to the landlord, to make sure those bills are paid in full. Again, I hate to be too prescriptive in what to tell folks to do, but I will say this: check back frequently. I would say check at least once a week, because if you got a 10-day time frame to respond, you have lost a couple of days in that process. Communication also goes to the email associated with the account. So I encourage people to check their inbox. I know there are folks that have panicked and created duplicate email addresses and duplicate accounts, and they lose track of those. If anyone gets locked out of their account because they lost track of how they created their application, they can go to the help desk that's listed there on the CHAP website as well and help resolve that process.
And I guess it's kind of a broad question for anyone who can answer.
I think one of the things that the court saw in the past, pre-pandemic, was that you'd have a case that came through, the tenant would get a notice, the court would process that case. In the event that an eviction order was granted, there was a very short window. The statute requires the constable to effectuate that lockout within a certain time frame. So they have like 36 to 48 hours to do that. Now, first, they would post a notice on that tenant's door, letting them know, or it's not really notice, it's a copy of the order, letting them know that they're coming back in a certain time frame, usually 24 hours or so, to do that lockout. So what we found is there was this race. There's this 24-hour window between the time that order gets posted on the door and the time that the constable shows up to effectuate the lockout, that many tenants were scrambling. And it's at that time that they reached out to social services. Well, what could social services do in a very short window of time to either find appropriate rental assistance for that tenant or to provide alternative housing for that tenant? And that became a problem for the court as well, because that tenant would then reach out to Legal Aid of Southern Nevada and say, what do I do? What do I do? And they would file a motion with the court. Well, can I stay it? Can I have a couple more days? Can I set it aside? The court would then almost have to process every one of those cases a second time, because we'd hear all of those motions. That tends to bog down the system just in general and overall. So one of the things that was our first discussion between Mr. Schiller and myself was, why can't we develop a system so that when the case first gets opened in the court, we can shoot it off and notify social services so that they can start their process? Now they're not limited to this 24-hour window where everybody has to act so rapidly, but instead they can have time to reach out to that tenant, to help relocate them if necessary, to identify potential rental assistance. I can't tell you how many cases that come through the court where the tenant is probably eligible for rental assistance, but because of the timing of the case, rental assistance used to only be available like the first 5 days of the month. And if you didn't get the rental assistance then, you had to wait until the next month. Well, that didn't really help anybody. That system just was broken. So that was one of the first conversations that I think Mr. Schiller and I had, and then this kind of collaboration blossomed from there to give some long-term assistance to the overall process, and I'm sure you can comment more.
I was just going to add, I think to your question, one of the pieces, in addition to what she's indicated in terms of that connection and notification, the other piece is rehousing individuals. So those individuals that are in crisis, so the messaging out there is if we are aware of them, then we can help house them, because there's really a twofold problem. Is the rent affordability there? And two, if there is going to be a lockout and they can't afford the rent, even if we process the application, we need to rehouse them. So that connection, and I think that was what I was referencing initially, is this, it hasn't occurred historically, so I think this will be a long-term connection that the crisis has really created the opportunity.
From the court's perspective, I think that's a very hard thing to predict. I can tell you that the Las Vegas Justice Court handles approximately 30,000 evictions a year in a normal year. So where we fall right now is really hard to predict. I think we were at about 15 to 17,000 evictions that were processed in 2020 alone. Now, some of those were for things unrelated to rent, but it's hard to tell. Like I said, we had 4,000 cases pending as of a couple of months ago based on the moratorium. So we know we're going to have to process those that are still viable cases. We've weeded some of those out. And what's to come is really, it's unpredictable. I know there are studies out there that predict an onslaught. We're braced for it as best as we can. And I don't know whether any of these gentlemen have a better prediction of numbers than what we have.
Just a follow-up, more an estimate on what we can provide. So between round one, which was exhausted, and in the dollars we know we have in round two, that total number looks like we'd serve a total of about 60,000 households. That does not include Rescue Act funding, which is yet to be allocated related to rental assistance. I would also echo, as the judge indicated, there are studies. I think the Gwynn Center at the onset of the pandemic estimated about 125,000 households in the Clark County area. So that's the number we've used.